Picture the scene. It is the Sinai Peninsula, approximately 1446 BC. The sun is a white coin hammered into a sky the color of bleached bone. Below the mountain, nearly 2 million people are waiting. Hungry, restless, recently freed from 400 years of slavery. And Moses is coming down. He carries something extraordinary. Not gold, not weapons, not a treaty with an empire. He carries a list. A list of what to eat and what never to touch. A list of which animals are clean and which are not. A list so specific, so strange, so seemingly arbitrary to the modern eye, that scholars and skeptics have been arguing about it for 3,000 years. This is not a video about religion. This is not a video about ritual. This is not a video about ancient Jewish culture or ceremonial law. This is a video about biology, written 33 centuries before the word biology existed. Because here is what nobody tells you. Every single prohibition in Leviticus chapter 11 maps to a specific biological threat. Every animal God called unclean carries a pathogen, a parasite, or a contamination risk that modern microbiology has now confirmed. Someone who understood how living cells work, how parasites replicate, how bacteria spread, and how disease jumps from animal to human. Someone who understood all of that gave these instructions to a Bronze Age shepherd on a desert mountain. And there is one line in particular, one line in Leviticus that no medical textbook in the ancient world could have produced. A line so biologically precise that when you finally understand what it means, you will not be able to explain it away. We will get to that line, but not yet. Let's start where the text starts. Leviticus chapter 11 verse 3. God speaks to Moses and Aaron. Moses, who was raised in Pharaoh's household, trained in the highest Egyptian science and medicine of his age, and Aaron, the older brother, the high priest, who would enforce these laws among the people. The instruction is this: you may eat any animal that has a completely split hoof and choose its cud. Both conditions required, both together. If an animal has one but not the other, it is tamai, that Hebrew word we need to sit with for a moment. Tamai does not mean sinful. It does not mean disgusting. The word tamai means compromised, biologically compromised, not safe to consume. A ruminant is an animal that ferments its food in a specialized stomach before chewing it again. The gera, the cud, cattle, sheep, goats, deer. These animals have a 4-chambered digestive system that breaks down plant cellulose so completely that by the time the meat reaches you, the pathogens that survive in single-stomach animals have been largely eliminated. Their gut biology is, in a very specific sense, a filtration system. A pig has a split hoof. A pig does not chew the cud. It has one stomach, a rapid digestive cycle, and it eats almost anything, including human waste, rotting carcasses, and garbage. Because its food moves through its system quickly, parasites that would be destroyed in a ruminant's slow fermentation process survive in pork. One of them is called Trichinella spiralis. You may know it as the organism responsible for trichinosis, a disease caused by eating undercooked pork, where the larvae of the worm insist themselves in your muscle tissue. The CDC still reports thousands of cases annually worldwide. The parasite has been alive since before Moses. And God said, "Don't eat the pig." The camel chews its cud but does not have a fully split hoof. God said not to eat it. Modern research confirms that camels are a reservoir host for Middle East respiratory syndrome, MERS, a coronavirus. The hare chews its cud but has no split hoof, forbidden. The hare carries Francisella tularensis, tularemia, a bacteria so dangerous it is classified as a potential bioterror agent. Every exception in the list has a reason. You just need a microscope to see it. Now look at the water creatures. Leviticus 11 verse 9. Only fish with fins and scales may be eaten. Not shellfish, not crustaceans, not bottom feeders. Here is what fins and scales tell you biologically. A fish with fins and scales is almost always a mid-water or open-water predator. It feeds on smaller fish. Its metabolism is fast. Shellfish, oysters, clams, mussels, shrimp are filter feeders. They pull water through their bodies by the gallon, concentrating everything in that water. Vibrio bacteria, hepatitis A, norovirus, red tide toxins. Oysters can concentrate Vibrio vulnificus to levels 60 times higher than the surrounding water. In a world with no refrigeration, no water treatment, and no hospitals, a bad shellfish harvest was not a bad meal. It was a community-level catastrophe. Now the blood laws. Leviticus 17 verse 14. You shall not eat the blood of any creature, for the life of every creature is its blood. The Hebrew here is dam, blood. Do not consume it, drain it, bury it in the ground. At the time this made no scientific sense to anyone. Blood is meat, blood is food. Every culture around Israel consumed blood, in stews, in ritual drinks, in sausages. But blood is also the primary vector for blood-borne pathogens. It is the highway on which BSE, mad cow disease, travels. It is how prion diseases move from animal to human. It is how certain strains of E. coli and Salmonella survive long enough to reach your gut. Draining blood from the carcass immediately after slaughter, which is exactly what the kosher practice of shechita requires, reduces pathogen load dramatically. Modern food safety science recommends it. Moses commanded it. The gap between those two moments is 3,000 years. Here is what we have seen so far. Every forbidden animal in Leviticus chapter 11 has a specific biological risk profile that modern science can now name. The pig and trichinosis, the shellfish and Vibrio, the camel and MERS, the blood laws and prion contamination. None of these connections require faith to see. They require a biology textbook, one that was not written until the 19th and 20th centuries. Moses had no textbook. He had a mountain, a desert, and a voice. If you are finding this worth your time, do something small right now. Click subscribe. Because what comes next is stranger. We have not even touched the quarantine laws yet. We have not talked about the Black Death. And we have not gotten to the one line in Leviticus I promised you. Leviticus chapter 11 verses 29 through 31. Rodents are forbidden. Mice, rats, moles, every creature that swarms along the ground. And contact with their carcasses makes a person tameh, compromised until evening, requiring washing. In 1346, a disease began moving west from Central Asia. By 1348, it had reached Europe. By 1353, it had killed between 75 and 200 million people, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the entire European population. The Black Death, Yersinia pestis, the plague. And here is what the historical record shows. Jewish communities in 14th century Europe experienced significantly lower death rates than their Gentile neighbors. Low enough that it triggered accusations of conspiracy, that Jews had somehow poisoned the wells. The actual explanation was far simpler and far more remarkable. Jewish law required hand washing before meals, after contact with the sick, after handling a carcass. Jewish law prohibited the consumption of rodents. Jewish law mandated the rapid burial of the dead, with strict ritual washing requirements for those who handled corpses. Yersinia pestis travels primarily via fleas carried by rats. Jewish communities did not eat rats. They washed their hands. They isolated the sick. They buried the dead quickly and then washed. The law that Moses received on Sinai was, in the 14th century, the closest thing Europe had to a functional public health system. And it saved lives that Rome's gods never could. The physician Maimonides. Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, one of the greatest physician philosophers of the medieval world, wrote in 1190 AD, in his book Guide for the Perplexed, that the dietary laws of Moses were, in his clinical judgment, medically rational. He was a doctor. He had no microscope. He had no germ theory. He was working from observation, from logic, and from a text that was already over 2,000 years old when he read it. And he concluded, the text was medically correct. He was writing 650 years before Louis Pasteur, and the text he was analyzing was 1,500 years older than he was. Here is what most people miss. The laws about tzaraat in Leviticus 13 and 14 are not laws about leprosy, exactly. The Hebrew word tzaraat covers a range of infectious skin conditions, what we might today call psoriasis, ringworm, impetigo, or actual Mycobacterium leprae infection. The laws are extraordinarily specific. When a suspicious skin condition appears, the person is brought to Aaron, the priest, who functions here as a public health inspector. The priest examines the lesion. If it has certain characteristics, color, depth, spread, the person is isolated. Not punished, isolated. They live outside the camp. They call out to warn others who approach. They wait. They are re-examined after 7 days, then again after 14 days. If the condition resolves, there is a reintegration protocol. If it spreads, isolation continues. This is a quarantine system, a functioning, medically rational, community-protecting quarantine system, written into religious law in 1446 BC. The Roman Empire, with all its engineering, all its medicine, all its Hippocratic tradition, had no quarantine protocol. Rome's response to epidemic was prayer to the gods and flight from the city, both of which, of course, spread the disease faster. The Antonine Plague of the 2nd century AD killed between 5 and 10 million Romans. The Plague of Cyprian in the 3rd century killed an estimated 5,000 people per day in Rome alone. The Roman world did not have Leviticus. Pay attention to this. Miriam, Moses' own sister, the woman who watched over him in the basket on the Nile, the prophetess who led women in song after the Red Sea crossing. Miriam develops Zaraat in the Book of Numbers. She is not exempt. She is not given special treatment because of her relationship with the lawgiver. She is isolated outside the camp for 7 days. The law applied to everyone. The system protected everyone. The ancient word tahor, clean, whole, biologically intact, and its opposite tamei, compromised, were not moral categories. They were public health categories. They just happened to be written in a religious text, because in 1446 BC there was no other kind of text. And now, the line I promised you. Deuteronomy 14 verse 21, Exodus 23 verse 19, Exodus 34 verse 26. 3 separate times, in 3 separate places in the Mosaic Law, the same instruction appears, word for word, repeated, underlined by repetition the way only the most important things are underlined. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. For centuries, readers assumed this was a prohibition against cruelty, a merciful protection against the disturbing image of cooking an animal in the very fluid that nourished it. That interpretation is not wrong exactly, but it is incomplete, because archaeologists excavating the ancient Canaanite city of Ugarit, the civilization that surrounded ancient Israel on the Mediterranean coast, found clay tablets in the ruins. Those tablets, dated to approximately 1400 BC, contemporaneous with Moses, describe a specific ritual, a fertility ritual, a ritual in which a young goat was boiled in its mother's milk as an offering to the gods of the harvest, to invoke blessing on the crop. Mastitic milk contains Staphylococcus aureus, E. coli, Klebsiella streptococcus. When you take that raw milk, potentially infected, and use it as a cooking medium for raw meat in a vessel used previously in an environment with no refrigeration, at a fire that may not reach full boiling temperature long enough, you have created a bacterial incubator. You have combined 2 biological risk factors into one pot and fed it to your community during a harvest festival when everyone is gathered together. The law did not say, the Canaanites are wrong to worship their gods. The law said, don't use their recipe, because their recipe will make you sick. 3,000 years before the CDC issued food safety guidelines. 3,000 years before anyone understood bacterial contamination of dairy products. God said, not the milk, not the kid in the milk, not that dish. Now here is where you have to stop and reckon with something. Modern microbiology did not identify Trichinella spiralis until 1835. Louis Pasteur did not propose germ theory until 1859. Joseph Lister did not introduce antiseptic surgical technique until 1867. The first quarantine protocols in Western medicine, derived consciously from the Leviticus model, did not appear in European law until the 14th century, after the Black Death had already killed 1/3 of the continent. Everything that modern food safety science, epidemiology, and infectious disease medicine recommends: hand washing, blood drainage, avoiding filter feeders in warm water, rodent avoidance, isolation of infectious skin conditions, rapid burial of the dead. Every single one of these practices was written into a religious legal code in 1446 BC. Moses did not have a microscope. He had no way to see a cell. He had no way to know that a pig's rapid digestive cycle would fail to kill a parasitic worm that a ruminant's slow fermentation process would destroy. He had no way to know that a shellfish's filter feeding would concentrate Vibrio to 60 times the surrounding water's concentration. He had no way to know that blood was the primary vehicle for prion disease. He had no way to know that rats carried fleas that carried Yersinia pestis. He had no way to know any of this. And yet, Every prohibition, every restriction, every rule about what you touch and what you wash and how long you wait, it all points in exactly one direction, toward biological safety, toward the preservation of human life, toward a God who made the cell before he made the law and wrote the law to protect what he made. The God who spoke from Sinai did not hand Moses a set of arbitrary cultural restrictions. He handed Moses a survival manual, written in the language of religion, because that was the only language that would ensure compliance across generations. Because if Moses had stood on Sinai and said, "Don't eat pork because of Trichinella spiralis," nobody would have known what he was talking about. But if God said, "Don't eat it," generations kept the rule and were protected by it without ever needing to understand why. Here are 3 things I want you to carry out of this video. The first is simply this: the dietary laws of Leviticus were not primitive. They were not superstitious. They were not arbitrary tribal customs dressed up in religious language. They were a precision-engineered public health system, written 33 centuries before public health existed as a field of study. Every prohibition maps to a real biological threat. Every rule about washing, waiting, and isolation reflects a practice that modern medicine confirms. The text was right. The science caught up later. The second is for you personally. When you read a passage in Scripture that seems strange, or harsh, or needlessly specific, the honest question to ask is not, why would God care about something this small? The honest question is, what do I not yet understand? The people who read Leviticus 11 in 1300 BC did not understand Trichinella. The people who read it in 1848 did not understand germ theory. The people who read it in 1950 did not understand prion disease. The text did not change. The human knowledge base did. You are not smarter than the text. You are just closer to understanding it. And the third thing, the gut-level thing. The same God who designed the cell designed the law that protects the cell. The same intelligence that encoded 4 billion base pairs of information into a molecule too small to see. That same intelligence looked at a group of freed slaves walking through a desert and said, "Here is what to eat. Here is what to avoid. Here is how to treat the sick. Here is how to handle the dead." Not because he wanted to control them, because he made them, because he knew what was in the pig, what was in the shellfish, what was in the blood, what was in the rat. Which of these laws surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one.